Diplomat, historian, and journalist. Edward Hallett Carr was at one point either a liberal, a socialist, a supporter of appeasement, a supporter of the Soviet Union, or critic of Marx. Much like our lives, Carr had an ever-changing life which helped shape his ever-changing views. In Carr's most famous work, What is History?, Carr approaches the fundamentals that go into defining what a fact actually is, what constitutes as a fact, and therefore what constitutes as history. A lifelong lover of history, E.H. Carr travelled across Europe, from the industrious city of London to the frigid lands of the USSR. An extraordinary contributor to the studies of international relations and history, E.H. Carr was a fanatic student and critical thinker. Carr was born in 1892 to a middle-class family in London. His family was supporters of the Liberal Party, with Carr himself praising Lloyd George as his childhood idol. A talented and gifted individual, Carr was actually given a scholarship to attend Trinity College at Cambridge. When the Great War broke out, Carr attempted to join the military, but due to medical reasons was not allowed. He instead joined the British Foreign Office in 1916, an institution he would work for until 1936. Carr was made a diplomat around 1917 to deal with relations in Russia. Lord Halifax himself praised Carr for his skills and political understandings. Carr continued his career as a diplomat and was part of the British delegation at the Paris Peace Conference and was involved in drafting parts of the Treaty of Versailles. Carr noted that he felt that the Germans were, quote, subjected to every petty humiliation and felt distaste towards the treatment of the Germans by the French. After the peace conference, Carr was stationed at the British Embassy in Paris, where he had great faith in the League of Nations. He worked closely with the League, and in the mid-1920s worked in the British Embassy in Latvia. His time in Riga led to a growing fascination with Russian culture. He learnt Russian in order to read Russian literature in the original format, and in 1927 Carr visited Moscow. His previously liberal views changed during this period as he indulged in the works of 19th century Russian intellectuals. In 1929, Carr became invested in Russian and Soviet books, reviewing them and writing journals. This interest would last until the end of his life. His status as a British diplomat meant that he kept his interests mostly subversive, and he wrote book reviews under the pseudonym John Hallett. In 1934, Carr published a biography on Karl Marx, presenting him as a highly intelligent and gifted thinker, but one who was devoted towards the cause of widespread destruction. He would later reflect on this book as his worst ever publication, and complained that he had written it only because his publisher had made a Marx biography with the precondition of publishing another biography that he was writing. Carr remained as a diplomat, and believed that the belief towards Germany as an antagonist in geopolitics was harmful towards peace. He believed that Germany should have been given its own economic zone to dominate in Eastern Europe, comparable to the British influence over the Empire or the American influence over the Americas using the United States dollar. With this economic structure, Carr believed that world peace could be assured. In 1933, he published an essay blaming the Treaty of Versailles for the rise of Adolf Hitler. Because Carr was a huge opposer of the Treaty of Versailles, Carr actually supported the Nazi regime to destroy the effects of the treaty. He later reflected on his views, stating that he was, quote, no doubt, very blind. In 1937, Carr visited the Soviet Union once again, and was left very impressed by what he saw. He visited Nazi Germany and reported that Germany was actually, in fact, quote, almost a free country. Throughout the 1930s, Carr supported the British policy of appeasement and believed that it was actually Czechoslovakia's destiny to be a part of Germany's sphere of influence. He also became very sympathetic to the Soviet Union and was impressed by Stalin's 5-year plan and believed that it stood as a very good contrast towards the failures of capitalism in the Great Depression. One of Carr's most famous works, The 20 Years' Crisis, was published in 1939, which dealt with the subject of international relations between 1919 and 1939. In the book, Carr defended his views of appeasement, but only under the context that it was the most realistic policy option. At the time Carr published the book, British Prime Minister Chamberlain had adopted a policy of containment. Carr reflected on this book by stating that it was dated even before it was published. In the book, Carr divided thinkers into two schools, realists and utopians. Now disillusioned with the League of Nations, Carr attacked the utopians, who are those who believe that a new and better international structure could be built around the League of Nations. Carr boldly stated that the new order constructed at Versailles was flawed, and therefore the League was a hopeless dream that could never achieve anything of worth. In contrast, realists were those who believed in dialectic progress. What is successful is right, and what is unsuccessful is wrong. To Carr, international relations was a struggle between the economically privileged have powers and the economically disadvantaged have not powers. Have powers, like the United States, Britain, and France, were inclined to avoid war because of their contended status, whereas have-not powers, like Italy and Germany, were inclined towards starting a war as they had nothing to lose. The declaration of war in Germany left Carr feeling highly depressed. He believed Britain could not defeat Germany, and spent the first year of the war working as a clerk. In 1940, Carr joined as a writer for The Times. He wrote an article about the scourge of unemployment, which, if removed, could remove the scourge of war. Carr's now left-leaning articles caused tension with the editor of The Times, who felt that Carr was turning the paper into something too radical. When his editor was replaced in 1941, Carr was able to write him whenever he wished. Carr was against a Carthaginian peace with Germany and argued for a post-war reconstruction of Germany along socialist lines. In the same period, Carr urged for a post-war world to be shaped by an Anglo-German partnership that would be aligned with the USSR against the United States. Carr argued that flawed economic systems had caused the Second World War and believed that the only way to prevent another catastrophe was to adopt socialism. Carr even went as far as to argue that Marxism was the most successful type of totalitarianism, as proved by the power of the Red Army during the Second World War. After the war, Carr published his two most popular works, A History of Soviet Russia and What is History? In the 1950s, Carr was a well-known admirer of the Soviet Union, which led him to write a 14-volume history of the USSR. The series only covered the history between 1917 and 1929, as Carr's plans to extend the series until the Soviet victory in 1945 were cut short by his death in 1982. Carr also published What is History?, a book based upon a collection of lectures he delivered at Cambridge University. The book is about historiography, and argues that the facts a historian studies cannot be fully understood until the historian, that has collected said facts, is studied. History is full of facts, but Carr tackles the issue of what facts are important and unimportant by dividing facts into two categories, facts of the past and historical facts. Whilst historical facts are pieces of information deemed important by historians, such as the Battle of Hastings happening in 1066 or the beginning of World War I in 1914, facts of the past are the opposite, and are instead facts that historians have deemed unimportant. Carr contends that the difference between the two categories is actually determined by the historian's own biases and agendas. He compares the collection and organisation of facts like a fishmonger, in which a historian collects the facts, takes them home, and cooks and serves them in whatever style appeals to him. Carr believes that facts are meaningless without a historian, and their own circumstances to help shape said facts. Quote, "The historian without his facts is rootless and futile. The facts without their historian are dead and meaningless." With this in mind, Carr concludes that the very definition of historical facts really does not mean much once the characteristics of the historian are factored into the equation. There is some irony in this. Carr himself was a huge critic of capitalism, and then a supporter of socialism, and as such, not even Carr is immune to the possible biases when it comes to presenting historical facts. In a way, Carr is unable to even come to a conclusion to his own question, and perhaps nobody can truly answer the question, what is history?